Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please. We have been cooking up some great content here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. All sorts of interviews, all sorts of people. We love it here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, and that's why we're putting together a best of edition of the show with your host, Jimmy Sangenberger. It's Best of Jimmy at the Crossroads coming your way.
And that, my friends, is how America was made great once again. Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sangenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics. Radio broadcaster master, now the celeb on the web. He's the smarty of the party. He's in cahoots with the grassroots. Jimmy at the Crossroads brings you thought-provoking commentary, hard-hitting interviews, original satire, and the best bumper music known to man. Jimmy at the Crossroads!
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics. We're for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics. Great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers, they want to understand. They come to the crossroads and Jimmy gives them the plan. I said, gonna talk money, gonna talk politics. Great for all generations, oh what a great mix. I got Jimmy. Come on Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends, and welcome to another edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sangenberger, your host for the program, bringing you engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style, once again in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you today, as always. And once again, if you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel, please do, youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. That is Jimmy at the Crossroads on YouTube. Plus, you see it in the lower third right there on Twitter. Please follow me at Sang Center. That's Sang with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter. Also on Facebook, facebook.com/Jimmy Sangenberger Pro is the place to go for Jimmy Sangenberger, our media personality. And then, of course, there is jimmyatthecrossroads.com, where you can access all of our videos and other great content, plus purchase some excellent, wonderful, fun, and exciting products on the shop in the menu at the top. And then also you can subscribe to, join Jimmy's Crossroads Club, our exclusive perks-filled membership program here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. So Jimmy at the Crossroads, the place to go. Members.jimmyatthecrossroads.com is specifically the website, but if you just go to jimmyatthecrossroads.com, the shop is in the top menu, as is the link to the Crossroads Club. And please, as well, be sure to follow our partners at the Washington Examiner, washingtonexaminer.com, and on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Great content there, to be sure. So today we've got a great best of show for you. We've done a lot now on Jimmy at the Crossroads, and we want to share some of the highlights. We're going back a little bit to begin with Andrew Wheeler, EPA Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. We talked about a range of topics. We'll highlight that for you. We also talked with Suzanne Staiert, who prosecuted a case against John Hickenlooper, running for Senate in Colorado, before the state's Ethics Commission. You do not want to miss that exchange. Plus, Anna Giaritelli and Carrie Severino joined us to talk about the Supreme Court's recent decision regarding the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA program. We'll share that, plus my thoughts on how the leftists in America today have been shielding their chosen groups. Lots to cover on today's Best of Jimmy at the Crossroads. Let's get started.
Ladies and gentlemen, on the harmonica, Jimmy Sangenberger.
Welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads, the show with probably the only host in the country that will actually welcome a senior member of the Trump administration by playing harmonica. I am Jimmy Sangenberger, joined now, and so pleased to be, by the administrator for the Environmental Protection Agency on our first Free to Choose Friday, focusing on the free market and environmental protection. Mr. Administrator Andrew Wheeler, welcome to the show. Good to have you here.
That was the best introduction I have ever had on any show I have ever been on. That was incredible harmonica playing. I loved it.
Thank you. I thought you might.
I really don't want to I think your listeners would rather listen to you play more than hear me talk.
All right, then I'll play. Here's what I like to do. We like to have fun here on this show and do things that are a little bit unorthodox. And I think the reason why, more than anything, not just because I like to do it, I enjoy playing the harmonica, but it's because things are so darn serious right now. And we need to cut loose and relax a little bit, I think.
We do. Things are serious. We need to take them seriously, but, we need to also see the humor in everyday life.
So,
and I think that's important. And, laughter is the best medicine. There's a lot of stress out there, and we need to calm people down some, and we need to just relax. It's interesting. I did a conference call yesterday with my Region 7 staff, and there's about 500 of them on the phone, and this is out of our Kansas City office, and they've been doing a weekly competition each week at the end of the staff meeting to this week was the most appropriate country music song title to represent the coronavirus. And the title that won, I nominated Crazy by Patsy Cline, but the title that won was an old Kitty Wells song, which I'd never heard of before. It was something along the lines, Only My Hairdresser and I Know the Truth, which is perfect for this time. Last week, it was a movie title, and it was Home Alone was the movie title that won last week in their competition.
You have some creative people. We had a very serious meeting
for 30 minutes, and we ended it with a nice lighthearted.
So I think that's
effort.
Fantastic. At the end, I will then ask you a question related to what you were saying with country music and me playing harmonica and that sort of thing. And I'll hold that to the end so we can also end on a similar note like that and sort of where we began. But Administrator Wheeler, I really appreciate you coming on to talk with us today. I've interviewed a couple of times on the radio and always enjoy our conversations. And I want to dive right in. I mean, today is our inaugural Free to Choose Friday here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, somewhat in honor of Milton Friedman, but also because of the fact that we as human beings have the right to choose and should be able to. And part of that means being able to innovate and choose creatively how to address environmental problems. That's what we've been talking about, the whole theme of today. And I'd love your overall view on how you approach environmental protection, because I'm guessing it's not that you want to destroy the environment, because I hear that a heck of a lot.
I hear that about me, but it's certainly not true.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank
exactly.
you. I'm actually an Eagle Scout. I still go hiking and camping. I love the outdoors. The last thing I want to do is do anything that will harm the environment. And the mission of my agency, the Environmental Protection Agency, is to protect public health and the environment. And so we have a dual mission here, and we are exercising that. But you're right. There's sensible ways of doing this. Perfect example is, we just finalized our CAFE standards for cars a couple of weeks ago. And what it did is replaced the second half of the Obama regulations. The Obama regulations were in two halves, and we just replaced the second half. The first half that they did back in 2012 projected by 2026 that half of the cars on the road would be electric vehicles. Right now it's less than 5%. And there's no way we would ever meet the 50%. So their standards were based on that premise, and that was what they were driving to. And that's ignoring what Americans want to buy, the cars they want to purchase. And as a result, the average age of cars on the road today is now 12 years old. It used to be 8, because people are holding onto their cars longer because the cars that are being produced aren't the cars that people want to buy, or they're too expensive. So we did our regulation. It's going to help lower the price of new cars, and it's going to allow automobile manufacturers to continue to produce cars that meet environmental standards that people want to purchase. To me, that's very common sense.
Yeah, I think it really is true in that way, where if you enable people to purchase what they want to purchase, and understand also that fuel economy standards is something that if you're going to buy a new car, you absolutely are looking for a vehicle that's going to be good on fuel economy. But since you mentioned the point about how expensive it can be for a new car compared with an old vehicle, particularly because of these regulations, I have no choice. We played this in the beginning of the show. I want to get your reaction. This is 1979, Milton Friedman on Phil Donahue's show making that exact point. I think there's just such resonance.
The thing that amazes me about people who make statements like this is their neglect of history. This country went for close to 200 years without a Ralph Nader and without these regulations. And that was a period in which this country had its greatest growth, in which people streamed to it from all over the world and were able to make a better life for themselves and their children. If you take the automobile industry in particular, since Henry Ford really revolutionized it, it transformed the nature of life in this country. The automobiles improved tremendously. They came down in cost relative to other goods. The effect of the kind of regulations you now have has been to make automobiles not more safe, but less safe. Why? Because by making them more expensive, they make it pay to keep an old car on the road longer. The average age of cars on the road has gone up, and old cars are less safe than new cars.
Administrator Wheeler, it seems that the more things change, the more government stays the same.
I think if you just play the harmonica and Milton Friedman all day, we'd be much better off as a country.
You know, there's a reason why Ken Starr calls me Jimmy the Harmonica Man, so I appreciate that. You know, glad you're enjoying it. But the point is just so well made. So, Administrator Wheeler, go ahead, please.
It's absolutely, and we're making the same point this year about cars and the difference between our regulations and the Obama regulations. And I loved that he brought up Ralph Nader. Probably a lot of your listeners, although Ralph Nader's still around, he's not as active as he used to be. You know, he came to fame back in the late 60s where he went after the Corvair, and he called it unsafe at any speed. The first car I drove when I turned 16 in the mid 80s was a Corvair. It was a 20-year-old Corvair, but I loved it. And you know, the way to make it safe was to put some weights because the engine was in the back. If you just put some weights in the front of the car, you had no problem with it. And it was a cheap, well-made car, got great fuel economy, and because of his book Unsafe at Any Speed, General Motors quit making it.
So fuel economy standards are one area in which the Trump administration has been scaling back some of the, I would say, overburdensome regulations that we've seen in recent years. There are other efforts as well. Bring us up to speed on some of the other initiatives that the Environmental Protection Agency has been working on, say, over the last several months to a year.
Sure. Well, in January, we finalized our WOTUS regulations. This is for waters of the U.S. This was again, to replace an Obama regulation that just did not work. And what we set out to do on the WOTUS regulation was to define for your average landowner so that they know whether or not their property falls under the federal jurisdiction. You know, in the past, people had to spend a lot of money going to hire lawyers to try to figure out whether or not they met the federal definition. We try to have a very clear-cut, easy-to-understand definition so that your average farmer, homeowner can tell whether or not their property falls under that. We also, for the first time ever, differentiated between state waters and federal waterways. You know, if the federal government were to stop regulating water tomorrow, and we aren't, and we didn't, and we're not going to, most of the waterways would already be protected by state laws. And then third, we also wanted to follow, and this may sound surprising to some people, certainly is surprising to people inside the Beltway, Washington, D.C. Beltway. We wanted a regulation that will be upheld by the courts and stand the test of time, because the water regulations have been flip-flopping back and forth between the Supreme Court and the other courts for about 20 years now. And we need certainty. The American public needs certainty. I really fundamentally believe that if people know what the rules are and they understand the rules, they will comply with them. We don't need to force a lot of bureaucratic red tape on your average citizen that requires them to hire attorneys and possibly violate the law unintentionally. We need to have better understood regulations.
Make no mistake, Colorado, where I'm broadcasting from, has one of the most significant U.S. Senate races in 2020. Incumbent Republican Senator Cory Gardner is vulnerable to a challenge likely by former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper. Perhaps fortunately for Gardner, however, last week, Governor Hickenlooper was found in violation of 2 counts of ethics violations against him before the state's Independent Ethics Commission, specifically in violation of a constitutional prohibition on gifts in the state's Amendment 41. Not only was he found in violation of ethics regulations from when he was governor of the state of Colorado in a complaint filed originally in October of 2018, But he also was held in contempt by the Independent Ethics Commission, and the Democratic Attorney General of the state was even ordered by a court to try and serve a subpoena to the former governor.
I would move that the commission enter an order finding the respondent in contempt for his failure to appear today. By failing to honor the subpoena of the commission, the respondent has indicated a disrespect for the rule of law, disrespect for the commission, disrespect for the process, disrespect for the parties and the witnesses, a disrespect for an agreement that was made to appear voluntarily before the commission.
Asserted that the commission has been causing delays in these proceedings and is now intimating that he wants to cause a delay in the proceedings by having the proceedings with him present on a later date, which we are not sure he would appear at because of his not appearing today.
That's where we are, and the failure to appear is something that I think you can see, that everyone can see the commissioners are not taking lightly.
This case was put forward, the filing of the ethics complaint, by the Public Trust Institute. And I am very pleased today to be joined by the lawyer for the Public Trust Institute, who essentially prosecuted this case before the Independent Ethics Commission, on which Governor Hickenlooper was found in violation of 2 of the 6 counts. Suzanne Staiert, also former Deputy Secretary of State for Colorado, joins us now here on the show. Suzanne, welcome to the program. It's good to have you.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Thanks for coming on. I appreciate you taking the time today. So I summed up some of the facts of the situation. Why don't you give us the full details?
Well,
at least on the backstory. Let's start with the backstory.
The backstory. So originally, the complainant, who was the former Speaker of the House, Frank McNulty, filed about 90-some different counts at the Ethics Commission. Most of them were dismissed because the Ethics Commission only has a 1-year statute of limitations. So we went forward on 6 different counts plus a failure to report the last couple days. And, it was quite the roller coaster to get there.
One thing that was so striking to me, I mean, I'd never heard, for example, of a Maserati limo before until I first looked into this back in 2018 and interviewed Frank McNulty from the Public Trust Institute about this whole saga. I mean, what are some of the things that Hickenlooper was doing in violation of the ethics rules, and what are the ethics rules that he was in violation of?
So in Colorado, you can't take, there's an amendment in the Constitution that was passed back in 2006. You can't take a gift. At the time it was passed, it was $50. They adjust it every year. So during the time of the complaint in 2018, it was $59. Can't take a gift over $59 from anybody if you're a elected official or a state employee or local employee. And so his were all well over. We were talking about private jet trips and exclusive kind of elite conferences and that sort of thing. So during the 2018 period, he took 5 separate private jet trips and went to a conference called Bilderberg, which was in Turin, Italy. And all the conference fees were paid for by Fiat Chrysler, including the Maserati limousine.
I would love to try one of those Maserati limos and get it as a gift, even just for a ride like he had that opportunity for. I don't know that that's going to happen, but what's so flagrant about this is that he had to know that this was a gift. He had to know that this was not something authorized under Amendment 41 in Colorado's Constitution. But Governor John Hickenlooper, then governor at the time, seems to have felt that he was above the law. Is that a sense that you got? Because I saw that play out the past couple days with the Independent Ethics Commission, too.
Yeah, I mean, at first I thought, well, maybe he just doesn't pay attention to the amendment and he just does whatever he wants. I mean, it certainly seemed like a pattern of conduct. But then when he was found in contempt by the commission for failing to obey the subpoena, you did really get the sense that he felt like he was above the law in all these aspects.
Again, we're talking with Suzanne Staiert, who is the attorney who essentially prosecuted this independent ethics commission case against John Hickenlooper, former governor of Colorado, now running for United States Senate. Was there a value amount placed upon these gifts that he had been given, for example, for the Turin, Italy trip, like an estimated value of what he had been provided by the organizers or by Fiat Chrysler?
No, that we didn't really estimate the cost because we had an estimate of just the transportation to and from the airport that was above $59. And so they'll look into that during sentencing, and they can fine him up to 2 times of whatever he took. But in addition to the transportation, there were 2 private tours. There was an army of security. I mean, this is not a conference of like local elected officials. This is a conference of CEOs and world leaders, and he was the only elected official from the United States. So this was not, so every night there were rooftop cocktails, there were formal dinners, there were these sessions, there were breakfast, lunches. It was very well attended to.
Here you've got an ethics complaint that he doesn't even want to entertain, and then he's got taxpayer-funded attorney actually doing the representation. And then he's refusing to testify, and ultimately has a contempt citation against him. I'm just stunned that this all is the way that he felt it was appropriate to operate like this. That is to say, we've got a former governor of Colorado, who seems to think that he is above the law and who seems to think that he is above any number of standards. Now, talk to me about the contempt citation. How did that happen, that he actually got held in contempt?
So I ended my case, and then I said, well, I have another witness, but I don't, we were on a WebEx Zoom type platform, and so you couldn't see everyone in the room, but we had already been told he wasn't going to come. So at the end of my case, I said, I have another witness, but I'm not sure if that person's here. I'm not sure how to proceed. And they said, well, why don't you just try calling him? So we called John Hickenlooper, and then there was, awkward pause. And then his attorney announced he was not present. And at that time, they entertained essentially a motion to find him in contempt, and then they found him in contempt. That night, the district court issued another subpoena to the attorney general to bring him in. And then, I don't know, maybe around 9 o'clock, he announced to the media that he would show up the next day. He didn't tell us until the next morning at around, 8:30.
Well, this is the same guy, recall, who said in an interview with somebody in the media, this is the kind of thing you should be protecting me from. You, the media, should protect me from, and you actually asked him about that.
I did. He had an interview with Channel 9 with Marshall Zellinger back in, I don't remember, maybe in the fall, where he said, we did everything they told us to, and you guys should be protecting us. So I asked him, who is we, who is they, who's you guys? And he said, you guys referred to journalists. That's who I was talking to.
You guys should be protecting me on stuff like this.
And in that comment, who is you guys? You guys should be protecting me.
Oh, I was referring to the journalist I was talking to because, there was one journalist I was talking to. So you guys was other journalists.
Now, something else, too, just a few minutes left with our guest, Suzanne Staiert, the attorney who essentially, I think it's still accurate to say, prosecuted this Independent Ethics Commission complaint against John Hickenlooper, former governor of Colorado, now running for United States Senate last week. When we look at this question of him showing up finally on Friday to testify, he didn't know answers to certain questions. He's clearly demonstrated, I think he even said, that he wasn't prepared to testify. And I think it was because he wasn't planning on testifying all along and was trying to avoid it altogether. And I think that also shows how little he took this seriously.
Yeah, I mean, we had hundreds of, maybe 100 exhibits, I guess, or 80. And I kept asking him about the exhibits, and he didn't recognize any of them. And so I asked him, have you prepared at all for this hearing? And he said no. One of my friends texted me because we had a conversation about this wedding he went to for Kimball Musk. And he talked about how he prepared like 6 hours to, officiate this wedding. And my friend said he spent, 600 times more preparing for this wedding than this hearing.
Hey everybody, Jimmy Sangenberger here, host of the talk show Jimmy at the Crossroads, which I publish online in partnership with the Washington Examiner. A lot of people ask me, what is the Crossroads? Why the Crossroads? Well, our show is cross-topical. It's at the intersection of politics and economics and other topics as well. We bring on a great intersection of A-lister guests, from Dallas Mavericks owner Mark Cuban to podcaster Dave Rubin, EPA Administrator Andrew Wheeler, Sidney Powell, who of course is Michael Flynn's lawyer, and also Dinesh D'Souza, noted documentarian and author. The show's cross-generational, reaching millennials and Gen Z, boomers and Gen X. We bring seriousness and also fun, with humor, comical videos, and more. And of course, we stand at the crossroads, sometimes playing the blues. Jimmy at the Crossroads is a different kind of talk show. It's not an attack program meant to own the libs. There are plenty of those, and they do give young conservatives the confidence to know that they're not alone and that what they believe is right. But it's not just about destroying the left and winning the argument. It's about winning people over. That's why Jimmy at the Crossroads is about growing the conservative movement, finding solutions, and helping to bring our country back to basics: free markets, limited government, individual liberty, and personal responsibility. In a moment, I'll tell you all about my new Crossroads Club that I know you'll want to be a part of. But first, take a look at some of what we've done here at the Crossroads.
You're an entrepreneur.
I'll give you the alternative.
You're an entrepreneur. You've got to create 30 million jobs over 3 years.
Yeah.
Tell me what companies can do that.
So, first
tell me
of
what
all,
20 or 50 or 100 companies can do that.
I can't tell you a specific companies that can do that because I don't know. In fact,
or investors.
But
Pick
I
the
don't,
greatest investors of
right.
all time.
Well, but I don't presume to think that I know who's going to be the best investor, the best company to do that. Just as I don't think the government is, that I can presume that the government's going to be effective to do that.
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, with all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said.
Has been on a determined campaign to convince the world that everything is hunky-dory. And when the government actually spends so much effort trying to convince you of something, you got to be very suspicious.
Your lawyers don't tell you even all the evidence that the government has given them, the few meager disclosures that were made literally at the 11th hour after you'd already been coerced into pleading guilty.
Hours of video evidence of Nancy Pelosi coming up on your porches and jujitsuing your precious packages, while Chuck Schumer waits in the street in the getaway van because he's too afraid to be a man and do his own dirty work.
Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Is it scary that YouTube and Twitter and Facebook have this kind of power over us? Of course it is. But you know what? These things didn't always exist, and they won't always exist. David beat Goliath. The little guy can beat the big guy.
So we have to figure out ways to fight in which we are able to have that kind of reach. We can build our own megaphones. And this is going to this is a little bit of a longer term project. It goes beyond Trump's re-election because it affects every election.
I'm good, man. It's a partnership. We're like this, Jimmy. I got you.
Jimmy, can I tell you that I've done about 200 shows in the last 3 weeks for this book tour? This has been by far my favorite interview.
And that, my friends, is how America was made great once again. Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sangenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics. Radio broadcaster master. Now the celeb on the web. He's the smarty of the party. He's in cahoots with the grassroots. Jimmy at the Crossroads brings you thought-provoking commentary, hard-hitting interviews, original satire, and the best bumper music known to man. Jimmy at the Crossroads!
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of no sense.
Now that you've seen some of what we're doing, I want you to become a part of it. That's why I'm so excited to tell you about my new Crossroads Club, where individuals and businesses alike come together to support real conversation that moves the ball forward for the conservative movement. As part of the Crossroads Club, you'll be the bedrock of making this possible, something proactive, not just reactive. And depending on your membership level, you'll get some tremendous perks. Things like my official Jimmy at the Crossroads harmonica engraved with your name on it. Chocolate harmonicas, delicious. Exclusive discounts or free tickets to special edition webinars, online video courses, and believe it or not, public events. They're coming back, folks. Trust me. Believe me. Plus, you may get a unique opportunity to share your own personal video message with my audience. Also, the business memberships offer great opportunities to promote your business. For example, the business leaders level will get a complimentary live read commercial that I will personally present on the show once a month. But even more fundamentally, you'll be a part of a community of patriots united to save America. Don't miss out on this unique and exciting opportunity. My friends, I don't need to tell you that America is at a crossroads right now. If you believe in advancing liberty, if you believe that the Constitution makes our nation exceptional, and if you believe in me and what I'm striving to do here, I ask you to join me. Join us at the Crossroads. Log on to members.jimmyatthecrossroads.com and become a Crossroads Club member today. Thanks for your support. Double standards of the left. We've talked about it several times on this program, including the protest double standard. Keep in mind that during the lockdown protests, people were saying on the left, you shouldn't go protest. Stay at home, abide by the law. But then a protest they approve of, one spurred on by the senseless murder of George Floyd, these protests across the country that were spurred on by that murder by a police officer resulted in protests that they felt were okay. Not just okay, they even encouraged people to jump in to those protests, to go participate. In fact, even physicians did that. There was a whole organizational effort earlier this month that's called White Coats for Black Lives. And that is physicians who went out to protest and specifically said, this is okay to participate in these protests because systemic racism is a sort of virus as well. In fact, if you go to pick 2, let's put up Mr. Matoush, pick 2. There were those saying that these protests were essential to America. An op-ed earlier this month in the New York Times entitled, "As a Black Doctor, Should I Choose My Skin Color or My Health?" said the following: these protests are necessary for the recognition and eradication of injustice. These protests are the first dose of medicine needed to rid the system of metastatic racism. To ask, what do you think as a black doctor about COVID-19 and the protests is to ask me to choose my skin color or my health. This is precisely the false choice Black Americans make all the time, which we should cease to make today. The answer to both is the same: enact policies that do not systemically disenfranchise and endanger Black people. In other words, they have a reason that they think is very strongly presented for these kinds of protests. They have a reason for saying that participating in these protests trumps concern about the virus. They have a reason for saying the protest should happen and physicians should even be a part of it and endorse it. Now, one can argue in favor of their case. For the purposes of this conversation today, I don't really care. I don't care if that protest is merited or not. If it is a protest and the Constitution protects both the freedom to peaceably assemble and the right to free speech, you should be able to peaceably assemble in protest regardless of the cause. And politicians and elites and doctors shouldn't be making that sort of determination. The double standard is very clear. We think this is an important health issue, systemic racism. Therefore, it justifies a protest calling for public policy changes across the country. Now, I would say that the health issues, and in fact I have many times on this program, that the health issues associated with the lockdowns, mental health debilitations, suicides, the inability to go get a biopsy to find out if you've had cancer, you've got cancer, and it's malignant and you need the tumor to be removed, the consequences of losing jobs en masse and potentially being out of work for years. You put all of those things and many more together in terms of health issues. Absolutely, there is a health case. If we want to get into debating whether or not a protest is merited, which again we should not, government should not be making that sort of determination. But if we want to have that kind of a debate, I will absolutely make the case every day of the week and twice on Sundays that the lockdowns are also absolutely have affected the health of millions of Americans in dramatically adverse ways other than COVID-19. So that was a double standard we dealt with before, but now there's another. Washington State has just mandated that everybody across the state must wear a mask. However, one county, Lincoln County, has decided to make an exception. This county, in pick 1, has made several exceptions. One of them about health conditions related to wearing a mask, another about children, okay. People with disabilities, all right. I could follow along with that. But then you get to number 4. People of color who have heightened concerns about racial profiling and harassment due to wearing face coverings in public. Look at that line. Heightened concerns. In other words, it's very subjective. Not only is there an exception made, but it is a subjective exception made for the individual to decide if they don't want to wear a mask or do want to wear a mask. Let's put up pick 3. The United States Constitution, ironically in the 14th Amendment, which was put into place during Reconstruction to protect the rights, especially of freed slaves, states this: all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. That last point is the most important relative to this Washington County's policy of let's make a subjective exception based on the concerns of an individual. Nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. That means that the government of Washington State and those who are part of that state are forbidden from treating people unequally. That is not to say that that hasn't been done. Absolutely it has. I'm not arguing that the Constitution has been perfectly followed. I would never argue such a thing. I am a conservative, after all, who believes that the federal government has gone well beyond the Constitution, and states have gone well beyond the U.S. Constitution in some cases, and certainly their own constitutions. So make no mistake, I don't believe that the Constitution has been perfectly followed. I'm not arguing that. But what I am arguing here is that this is a violation expressly of equal protection under the law. First of all, I don't think a mask requirement should be made anyway, should be issued anyway. Nobody should be required by the state to wear a mask. But if you are going to make such a statement, unless it is very directly tied to something that makes sense, like children, disabilities, or a health issue that would make you adversely affected directly by it, you can't make some kind of exception and vague and broad exception to what is being enforced as the law, even though it's not a law, it's arbitrary by the state. You must abide by it. Okay, you should have to abide by it regardless of the color of your skin. The double standards presented by the left are fundamentally wrong on every level, including levels they should be advocating for. But alas, here we are in our society today. If you are on board with their view, or you exemplify some particular position that they have taken, you get a pass. It's okay. But if you disagree, if you take a different position, if you come at things in a different way, or if you're not part of a particular group that they've decided needs special treatment, in the case of this Lincoln County, Washington exemption, well, so what? We don't really care. That's not a free society. As Thomas Jefferson said, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, and we must make sure to be eternally vigilant. Here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, in regards to the DACA program, the United States Supreme Court in a 5-4 decision saying that the Trump administration cannot discontinue DACA, particularly given the way in which it went about getting rid of the program. We talked about that today here on Jimmy at the Crossroads with Anna Giaritelli, Homeland Security reporter for the Washington Examiner, as well as Carrie Severino, president of the Judicial Crisis Network, offering some analysis. So let's just get right to it. What's this decision? What does it tell us? What did they decide?
Yeah, so in a 5-4 decision, you had Chief Roberts side with the 4 liberal justices on the Supreme Court. And it's basically, they're saying President Trump wrongly terminated or attempted to terminate DACA, which is a program that was created by President Barack Obama in 2012 after Congress didn't pass comprehensive immigration reform. President Obama took executive action so that children who were brought here before the age of 16, don't have a criminal record, and fit other criteria, could get protection from being deported and could work in the country until a permanent solution was reached. Trump rescinded that in 2017. And what happened today, a number of lawsuits were filed in 2017 and 2018. The Supreme Court said the way you tried to dismantle the program is not right, and so we are not going to let you take it apart. But they did not side on the program in and of itself. So you could see the Trump administration try again in the future. They probably won't have enough time to do so before the election.
So it comes down more to the process and the reasons that were presented for doing this, and with the timeline and the way they went about it, and as opposed to the issue of the program itself.
Exactly. Yeah. What they decided was that it was in violation of the Administrative Procedure Act, which is just saying this, there's a certain way you're supposed to do things. Conservatives had argued before this that Obama illegally took this action on his own, saying, I have paper, a pen, and a phone. I'll do it on my own if Congress isn't going to act. And so then by the same standards, Trump took action and said, I'm going to take action on my own and rescind the program, kind of by the same logic. So now what we have is to wait and see. Certainly, immigrant advocates are relieved at this. The program is applicants must renew their status every 2 years. And so what you've seen since 2017 is people falling off, the numbers declining. At one point, you had 800,000 people who had been approved under DACA. So it is a pretty widely felt program. And the implications of if it was allowed to proceed would have been, does Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the ICE agency, do they go after immigrants who were DACA recipients and begin deporting them? This at least gives a pause. And the question really next is, how does the White House respond, and the lawsuits likely to come from any response?
Now, there was a dissent from Justice Thomas, who was joined by Justices Alito and Gorsuch. Kavanaugh did a separate dissent of his own. What was the central premise of the Thomas dissent?
Thomas argued that he really just called it politically controversial, really an effort to avoid a politically controversial move. And then Brett Kavanaugh, who is a Trump appointee himself, filed a separate opinion, and he sided with both the dissent and the majority. So he didn't technically take a side, which was interesting. But certainly the three, Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, and Neil Gorsuch, another Trump appointee, all said it was incorrect. It would, quote, hamstring all future agency attempts to undo actions that exceed statutory authority.
Let's start with today's decision on the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. We just heard from Anna Giaritelli, reporter at the Washington Examiner, who gave us some of the basic facts about this. But what's your legal takeaway?
I think this is really concerning to me because I think we're seeing a pattern of the courts being used as a partisan weapon against this administration in particular. And this is another example of Chief Justice Roberts being complicit in that politicization of the court, really. You had this case where we're dealing with the DACA program, but just a couple of years ago, the Chief Justice agreed with several of the other members of this court that the DAPA program, which had a very similar basis for it, was unconstitutional. And now you have him saying that actually, even though DACA, presumably it's equally unconstitutional, the government has to jump through a series of hoops in order to actually stop enforcing a unconstitutional program. I mean, that is bizarre to me that you would create procedural hurdles and roadblocks to stop doing something that's illegal in the first place. The only difference that seems to be between his decision in the DAPA case and his decision in the DACA case is the identity of the president, and that's a real concern to me, to see a different standard being applied to President Trump than was applied to any previous president, really.
So Justice Clarence Thomas seems to echo your sentiments in his dissent, joined by Justices Alito and Gorsuch.
Yeah, absolutely. He said this looks very political. It seems like the court's trying to avoid making a controversial decision here. But you know what? That's something that ultimately is going to get the court into even more partisan and political trouble. You can't dodge important issues the court is supposed to decide by simply kicking the can down the road, as he did here, as the chief has done in the census case before this. In fact, what that does is turn the court into a much more political actor. And that is going to be very bad ultimately for the institution of the court as a whole. And certainly it's bad for the rule of law to have a double standard here where you apply it differently to the Trump administration than to others.
You know, what's so striking to me is that this was a program put into place unilaterally by the President of the United States, not by Congress. And then the President of the United States today, or the current President, Donald Trump, says, we're getting rid of this executive order, in essence, that Barack Obama, the previous president, had put into place. It seems logical to me that a president should be able to rescind another president's order, especially if it is unconstitutional, Administrative Procedures Act or not.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's what Justice Thomas's dissent was really saying. He's like, look, this was put into place by a memorandum by President Obama. It is bizarre to say that you can't then, if that's all you did to put it into place, how is it that it requires more to get rid of the program than it did to start it in the first place, especially when the program is simply not legal. And you don't need to give a huge, analysis of all these different reasons you're rescinding it. Saying this program is illegal in the first place, that should be enough. That should say it. There were a couple other dissents. Even Justice Alito had another dissent, and then Kavanaugh said, "Okay, even if you said that this is not illegal and void ab initio," he went through and said, "Look, they even did do enough analysis here. Why is this not enough analysis?" So this case should have been decided so many ways in favor of rescinding the DACA program that it's really shocking to see the Chief Justice yet again tie himself in knots trying to come up with a reason. And again, all this is really doing is requiring the Trump administration to go back to the drawing board, write up a whole, show your work is basically what they're saying. Except for that when you already have something that is clearly illegal on its face, you don't have to show any more work than that. So I think what the majority is saying is, well, just go back to the drawing board and give us some more explanations. But who's to say they won't have some other political reasons to find fault with those explanations when they finally come up with them again? This has taken literally years of litigation, and that seems to be the strategy.
Again, we're talking with Carrie Severino, president of the Judicial Crisis Network. And one thing that it seems to me, Carrie, that is the case about Chief Justice John Roberts is that he seems to be, more than anything else, more than some kind of conservative, for example. In decision after decision, we see a lot of instances where he's not operated as a conservative justice, but he seems to be an institutionalist first and concerned about the perception of the Supreme Court in the public eye. At least that's how I have tended to look at a lot of what Justice Roberts has done. Chief Justice Roberts has done as Chief Justice, especially since the Obamacare decision. What do you think about that idea of an institutionalist first?
Well, I think that is kind of how he thinks of himself, as somehow protecting the institution. Here's what concerns me. What he is doing is not helping the institution of the court. It is hurting the institution of the court. The best thing for the court as an institution would be for it to have a reputation of abiding by the law, the rule of law, applying it fairly and even-handedly to parties whichever side of the aisle they are on. What we have here is a court that's acting very politically. It's acting politically, ironically, in a way, in order to try to avoid particularly people on the left in the media saying that they're political. So they know that anytime they have a decision that might be in favor of the Trump administration, they're going to be called political. So they do kind of a reverse move and say, well, let's rule the other way, and then they won't call us political. The bottom line is that is still the politicization of the court. A few years ago, Justice Roberts had a great line in one of his cases about racial preferences. And he said the best way to stop discriminating on the basis, to stop discrimination on the basis of race is to stop discriminating on the basis of race. You should not have discrimination on the basis of race, whether you think you're doing it for beneficial or for evil purposes. That same thing happens here. The best way to stop the politicization of the court is to stop making politically motivated decisions, even if you think you're making them for great reasons. No, if you're motivated by politics in your decision, then you're politicizing the court, and ultimately that is the worst thing you could do for the institution.
Hope you enjoyed today's Best of Jimmy at the Crossroads. Excited to bring you so much more engaging, intelligent talk, saying style in partnership with the Washington Examiner. That is it for us today. We will be back same time, same place with, again, more engaging, intelligent talk, saying style as we do our level best to make sense out of nonsense. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. Check out the shop and Crossroads Club membership program at jimmyatthecrossroads.com. My thanks to our partners at the Washington Examiner, to Nathan Matoush, producer extraordinaire, working the Matoush magic, and you for listening. Have a great day. God bless America.